What's up, guys? So today we're looking at a little automatic knife that I picked up from an antique shop, which I thought was pretty cool. So the backstory here is my wife and I went antiquing a little while back, and we were kind of antique hopping. So there's maybe 4 or 5 kind of major locations that are somewhat close to us that we know, like if we want to go antiquing, we kind of do the rounds. Sometimes if we're doing it like as part of the day, like we're on the way somewhere, maybe we'll stop in for 5 minutes at one of those locations that's on the way. And then like if there's a day we want to just do antiquing all day, that's when we'll go like hit them all up, you know. So there's one new place. Actually, there was an old owner that sold it to the new guy, and the new guy kind of rearranged everything, which is nice because you get to see stuff you don't normally see. This place is massive though. Like you can probably go back there every single day for 2 or 3 weeks and still be finding new stuff. When it comes to going to antique places and knives, I don't have a great experience. I mean, it's limited. I've only been to so many different antique shops, and you know, obviously it's only in my area or within reason. It's, you know, like I'm not going to antique places that are 3-4 hours away, you know. So my experience thus far with antique shops and knives is that they almost always have a very, very small knife collection to show, and it's really, really hit and miss. And what I mean by that is that this particular place only had like cheap knives, like literally Frost Cutlery stuff that you'd see on the Home Shopping Network. Well, not Home Shopping Network, but Cutlery Corner. I don't even know if that's still a thing. You know, 2 in the morning knife sets, stuff like that. Like literally knives that cost someone $2 to buy and they're selling them for $6, you know, to make some money. Those are the type of stuff I usually see at antique shops. Occasionally I'll actually come across a real antique knife, and what I mean by that, because antique, I think by definition is 100 years or older. So we call a lot of things, especially you go to antique shops, a lot of the stuff is just vintage things. Does that make sense? Not, you know, not everything's 100 plus years old. Some things are 20 years old or 50 years old. That's not really antique, but it kind of gets thrown in the same pot of just being old. Okay, so those terms are kind of like misused and flip-flopped. I've even done it myself. I'll call something antique from like 1940. That's not an antique, all right? It has to be a 100 plus year old item to be considered antique. But anyway, so I'm going through the cheap knives, and there's multiples of the same knife too. There's like 15 of the one little zombie green, kind of like neon green handle, little lockback, super, super cheap Chinese knife, like again, $2 knife. And I flip it through, and then there's like 5 or 6 of this other design, super cheap, right? I'm just kind of like very not excited about it. And this was sticking up like this, okay? And I picked it up, turned it around, immediately said, okay, I'm getting this. And the reason is because I thought this was a knife that I had back in the 90s. It screams 90s, like very early 90s. But I had a knife that looked identical to this, or at least I thought it was identical, and it was branded Jaguar. Now, some of the guys who are watching who have been collecting knives for years, you remember Jaguar brand, okay? I don't know if they cease to exist these days or if people just don't buy them anymore, but they made a ton of cheap knives, and even back in the 90s, they were copying a lot of famous designs. There was a Paragon branded Cobra knife, very, very popular at the time. Very cool, automatic, super smooth, really slick looking knife. You can Google it if you want. Jaguar had a copy of it. The Benchmade Spike, very popular knife at the time. Jaguar had a copy of it. You know, the list goes on and on. The Colt, what was it? The Colt, I don't know if it was called a 45, whatever. It was a Tanto knife, whatever. There's another knife that was popular at the time, made by Colt, and Jaguar had a copy of it. So they were like, I don't know, the OG copy machine from China. Do you know what I'm saying? But anyway, so they had this knife, and what's super interesting is as soon as I opened it, okay, it is an automatic. So it's push button automatic. It has a coil spring around the inside of the pivot there. So the button itself is what's, you know, keeping the pressure on the knife. When you push down, you know, it frees that area for the knife to open, and obviously the spring tension opens it. So it's a little cool little automatic. But when I opened this and looked at it, it is not marked Jaguar. It is marked USA, which is really weird to me. It's literally the same blade, exact same blade, not like the same profile, the same serration pattern, the same length of serrations, the same grinds, the same design, the same nail nick, which by the way is not functional because you can't open this knife without using the automatic feature. I cannot pull this open with a nail nick. So what's the point of having it in there? Well, I'll tell you, it's because they made a bunch of knives with different handles and stuff with the same blades. So this exact blade was probably in, 15 or 20 different knives with different handles and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of silly. It has a nail nick. You'll never use it. You can't use it unless it breaks. If some mechanism breaks in here, maybe you can use that, but it would probably be flopping around anyway. So the blade, literally identical. The handle shape, identical. The cutouts in the handle, identical. Okay, long line, short, short. And then these three little dashes, totally identical. What's not identical to the Jaguar is my Jaguar had, first of all, this has a huge button. Okay, this thing is really sticking out. It also has a safety on the back. It's a little wheel safety. Okay, so you basically just rotate this a little bit to put it into safe. Now, if I have it open and pulled down or rotate down, it will keep it from coming unlocked, which is nice. All right, and then of course in the closed position, if I rotate it down, it's also locking that button so it doesn't accidentally open in your pocket. It's needed because the button's so big. But anyway, in the Jaguar version of this, there's no wheel safety lock, and the button is shorter, and there's a cutout here. It's a recess, okay? And the idea, like a lot of modern automatics, side opening automatics that don't have safeties, is that the button's not easily pushed because it's recessed. The hardware you can see is Phillips head screws, okay? Phillips head screws, that's what's on here. And we'll talk about the pot clip in a second. So now the original Jaguar did also have Phillips head screws, but in a different location. Like there's a body screw here. I remember being in the middle. And that's why these slash marks were the way they are, is because there was a body screw right here. So, I don't know what's going on with this one. I don't know if this was maybe the original design that Jaguar was copying. Is this a copy of a Jaguar? Is this something completely different? It's weird that it's marked USA, but it's not branded. American-made companies, knives made in the USA, almost always have their branding on there. They're advertising what it is. So it's just really weird. It's possible that this was Chinese made. It's a copy of a copy of a copy, and they threw USA on the blade just for selling purposes, that it's not actually made in the USA. I don't really know. This is one of those knives that's kind of a mystery to me. Pocket clip, it's kind of random. I don't even know if this is original to the knife. The Jaguar that I had did not have a pocket clip at all. It did have a lanyard hole, which matches this one. But it's just, it's interesting pocket clip. It's just super generic with this just rectangular shape here. And just, two Phillips head screws just driven into there. They're probably self-tapping screws, if I had to imagine. But yeah, I mean, it's a cool little throwback. It's totally a 90s knife. I just don't know its origins. I don't know what's going on with it, other than it was cool and I had to have it. So I asked the guy, because all the other knives are marked like $6, $7, right? Which is ridiculous for what it was. They're $2 knives, whatever. I would say, like, if you're like a 10-year-old kid, 13-year-old kid, you walk in there, you don't know anything about knives, and I was that kid. I was more like 9 at the time when I was that kid. But it's just like, knives are cool. You want knives, so it's like, okay, mom and dad, can I have $6 for this knife, or $7, whatever? Yeah, sure. And they're happy as crap. It just doesn't matter the steel, doesn't matter the quality. It's cool. I have a knife, and I start a knife collection. That's what happens, right? So I asked the guy, Mike, how much for this one? Because this is the only one that did not have a price tag on it. And I was assuming he was going to say like $20. So he takes it, and this, by the way, it was locked. I already played with this point, and I put the lock back on as a courtesy. So I said, hey, how much for this knife? And I handed it to him. He wouldn't, accidentally open it and cut himself. I don't know. Most times these people don't know much about individual items. They know a little, like antique owners, or antique shop owners, in general. And this is in general. I'm sure there's expert antiquers or antique shop owners. But from my experience, they know a little bit about this, a little bit about that, a little bit about everything. But they're not experts in any one specific thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's another place I go, and I'm always asking questions, and the girl that's there, super, super nice, doesn't know anything about anything that she sells. Like, they have antique tools and stuff, and I'm asking a question, doesn't know anything about antique tools. They have silver. I was getting into a conversation about silver coins. She had no idea what I was talking about. I've got a Zippo from her once. I had no idea. She's like, oh, that one's broken. I opened it up. I told her, I'm like, well, it's missing the flint. It's just old, so it deteriorated. She was like blown away, like, oh, thank you. That's awesome. She had no idea. Thought it was broken because it didn't make a spark. So not all antique shop owners know what they're talking about. In this particular case, guy was super nice. And he looked at it and he said, I could probably do like, I don't know, $5. Sold. There you go. There's $5. Thank you. But he literally went like this and he was pushing the button and he turned and looked at this and he pushed this. He didn't rotate it. There's knurling on it. It looks like a wheel, but he went like this. Then he went like this and then he tried to pull it open and he's like, oh man, this one might be broken. And that's when I, of course, told him that, no, it's just, there's a safety on there. I said, push that up. And he pushed it up and pushed the button. He's like, oh, cool. And that's when he's like, well, I could just like $5 on something like that. Sold. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And then, you know, he said, oh, you're like, do you collect knives and stuff? Because he saw my neck knife. That's the first thing he did, was staring at it. I said, yeah, I love collecting knives, all kinds of stuff. And he's like, well, I got these knives coming in. They're super, super nice. And you might be interested. You might want to come back and check it out. It's a whole set. And he's going on and on about it. I'm like, oh, cool. And he was explaining it. And the more he explained it, the more it sounded like something from the Franklin Mint. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, okay, well, you know, I might not be interested in something like that. But then he gave me his information, like, for the website so I can check it out on there. And like I said, he was nice and stuff, knew nothing about knives. And that's okay. You don't have to know much about what you're selling when you sell such a variety of stuff. You know, you're talking about items that span, you know, 100 years. And items from every part of our life, everything, you know, electronics and kitchen stuff and glassware and knives and tools and picture frames and record players. And I mean, just think about it. You walk into an antique shop or even like a consignment shop and stuff. It's just, there's so many things there. So not everyone knows everything about everything. I'm a guy, you know, I should own an antique shop because I'm not an expert in anything. I appreciate the the very complimentary comments I get sometimes, like, you're the knife god. I'm just a dude who likes knives, you know. It's flattering to me. I've been around knives for 25 years. It's been a passion for me. So, of course, I've accumulated an encyclopedia of information, but I don't know everything about knives. I'm continuously learning about knives, you know. And I have a specialty. And I said this to someone recently because they're like, oh, how about this really old knife? And I'm like, I don't know anything about that. And they're like, oh, I thought you knew everything about knives. No, I don't. But if I had to say what my specialty is, I would say folding knives, specifically from 1985 to 2010. Anyway, just wanted to share that with you guys. Thought it was a cool little find. It is interesting to me that it's so similar to the Jaguar, but not. I don't know if they copied Jaguar. I don't know if Jaguar copied someone else. The original Jaguar I had in the 90s could have been a copy of another knife that I was never aware about. So, I mean, even if you guys know, if you look at this knife design, who is the original creator, the original designer, whatever company or whatever brand and knife model did this come from? Because this was just such a heavily copied design. And this one is a little different from the Jaguar. And just the fact that it's marked USA, but has no actual brand, is throwing me for a loop. I mean, this screams Chinese knife. You know, so is the marking fake? I don't really know. I don't really know at all. But it's still a cool knife either way, and a little piece of 90s history for sure, regardless of whoever made it. But I want to share that with you, and also mention this is the first functional automatic knife I've ever seen at an antique shop. Whenever I go, if I do happen to see an automatic knife, they never work. They're always broken, always. So I thought this was kind of cool. As soon as I picked it up, I thought it was a Jaguar. And then when I opened it, and after kind of looking at it afterwards, I'm like, wow, I'm kind of surprised this thing actually works. I mean, I never get to see one that's functional. Once in a blue moon, I'll have seen, you know, an old fishtail auto or something from like the 40s or 50s. But the springs are always broken. Always. I always get excited too. I'm like, oh man, this one's gonna work. And no, nothing at all. I mean, the cool part about a push button automatic, a coil spring automatic like this, is that if the spring breaks, it's still a button lock. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, let's say there is no spring in there, it'll stay shut. And when you push the button, you can manually open it. You know, I'm holding the spring pressure here, but if the spring breaks, that's it. And it'll still lock open. It'll lock open, lock closed. You can depress the button and, you know, flick it out if you want, which is pretty cool. So anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys have an awesome day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with a brand new video. Take care.